I do want to emphasize that the kind of feedback that we heard here, this initial feedback on the report, is something that we'd like to hear from many more of you. The report is available. FDA will be providing an opportunity or notification about how to make comments or provide input on the report to guide the efforts from here on out. I'll say more about that later as well. Right now, though, I want to turn to a topic that's already come up extensively in the context of this medical device post-market surveillance systems, and that's how it interacts with medical device innovation. So as you heard today, medical device surveillance is about identifying and addressing potential safety issues involving medical devices much more effectively than in the past, as well as understanding the benefits of medical devices in actual practice more effectively than in the past. But as the last panel emphasized, in order to help create the maximum value from this system, it would be very beneficial to have an infrastructure that can also help provide more rapid answers about greater value, and that can potentially have important implications for creating a more effective and perhaps more balanced system for regulating medical devices in both the pre-market and post-market context. So in this session, we're going to try to focus much more on medical device surveillance and its implications and potential benefits for medical device innovation. And with that in mind, I'd like to introduce three people with very extensive experience and expertise on this critical topic. Aaron Kaplan is a professor of medicine and cardiology, and he's the director of the Dartmouth Device Development Symposium, director of research for the cardiology section of the Geisel School of Medicine and the Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. Ross Jaffe is a managing director at Versant Ventures. He's also been very much involved in the Medical Device Innovation Collaborative and a range of other issues across not just the investment industry, but the broader community that is focused on accelerating and improving the process of medical device innovation. And Mike Musalem is the chairman and CEO of Edwards Life Sciences. You already heard Edwards referenced earlier for its involvement in efforts to develop better evidence. And just as a reminder for those of you who don't know, Edwards has been a central player in the TVT registry for transaortic valve replacement, one of the most extensive examples we have in the United States today of a extensive post-market surveillance system. It's provided a lot of insights, but also a lot of potential for learning on how we can do this better and more effectively going forward. So once again, we're going to start with some brief opening comments, some framing comments from each of our panelists, and we'll have a little bit of discussion before breaking for lunch. So Aaron, let me turn to you first.
Thank you, Mark. First, I really appreciate the opportunity to participate and want to echo other folks' congratulations to both Brookings and the committee for the leadership and the work. This is a very important area. As Mark told you, Aaron Kaplan, I'm a professor of medicine at Dartmouth. An active interventional cardiologist. In fact, will be on call this weekend for the cath lab, which will be focused on providing acute infarct care to patients in northern New Hampshire and much of Vermont. I'm also a medical device entrepreneur. One of my companies is developing the first dedicated coronary stent to treat bifurcation lesions, and it's in the final phases of the IDE PMA process. The clinician in me understands the importance of this. The interventional cardiology community has been very fortunate in terms of the rapidity in which we've had available of new data and new technology, which allows my group this weekend provide acute infarct care to patients that have changed demonstrably over the last 10 years and over the last 2 decades has really improved dramatically the outcomes of patients with acute infarcts, with dramatic reduction in mortality. And reduction in stay.
In the past, but as the last panel emphasized, in order to help create the maximum value from this system, it would be very beneficial to have an infrastructure that can also help provide more rapid answers about greater value, and that can potentially have important implications for creating a more effective and perhaps more balanced system for regulating medical devices in both the pre-market and post-market context. So In this session, we're going to try to focus much more on medical device surveillance and its implications and potential benefits for medical device innovation. And with that in mind, I'd like to introduce three people with very extensive experience and expertise on this critical topic. Aaron Kaplan is a professor of medicine and cardiology, and he's the director of the Dartmouth Device Development Symposium and director of research for the cardiology section of the Geisel School of Medicine and the Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. Ross Jaffe is a managing director at Versant Ventures. He's also been very much involved in the Medical Device Innovation Collaborative and a range of other issues across not just the investment industry, but the broader community that is focused on accelerating and improving the process of medical device innovation. And Mike Musalem is the chairman and CEO of Edwards Life Sciences. You already heard Edwards referenced earlier for its involvement in efforts to develop better evidence. And just as a reminder for those of you who don't know, Edwards has been a central player in the TVT registry for transaortic valve replacement, one of the most extensive examples we have in the United States today of a extensive post-market surveillance system. It's provided a lot of insights, but also a lot of potential for learning on how we can do this better and more effectively going forward. So once again, we're going to start with some brief opening comments, some framing comments from each of our panelists, and we'll have a little bit of discussion before breaking for lunch. So Aaron, let me turn to you first.
Thank you, Mark. First, I really appreciate the opportunity to participate and want to echo other folks' congratulations to both Brookings and the committee for the leadership and the work. This is a very important area. As Mark told you, Aaron Kaplan, I'm a professor of medicine at Dartmouth. An active interventional cardiologist. In fact, will be on call this weekend for the cath lab, which will be focused on providing acute infarct care to patients in northern New Hampshire and much of Vermont. I'm also a medical device entrepreneur. One of my companies is developing the first dedicated coronary stent to treat bifurcation lesions, and it's in the final phases of the IDE PMA process. The clinician in me understands the importance of this. The interventional cardiology community has been very fortunate in terms of the rapidity in which we've had available of new data and new technology, which allows my group this weekend provide acute infarct care to patients that have changed demonstrably over the last 10 years and over the last 2 decades has really improved dramatically the outcomes of patients with acute infarcts, with dramatic reduction in mortality and reduction in stay, with providing real value to the community. As an entrepreneur, I know how important these efforts are as well. As an entrepreneur, I can tell you that involved in some early phased companies, that this is among the worst environments I've seen in the last 20 years for launching new enterprises. I know Ross will talk about this in a more informed manner. But one of the reasons is a long cycle length it takes from initiation to getting investment to getting things into the clinic and the market to get the kind of feedback that we need that really drives the innovation cycle. And that this is crucial, and I think that this report, which really focuses on leveraging very large investments in the electronic medical record, as well as in UDI, is crucially important. I'd like to give 2 examples of where the post-market has served us well, one where it serves us well, and one I think where there's real benefit for what we can do. So one's been alluded before, has been TAVR. As an interventional cardiologist, I've seen a dramatic change in how we treat patients with aortic stenosis, really addressing real important unmet need, and that the post-market portion of that with the TVT registry has been very impressive. And this has taken real leadership from CMS, FDA, the academic community with the STS, and other organizations, and from industry. Mike and his crew has done a lot of work on this, working very closely as well as has a Medtronic. And I see this in my team that are delivering, actually on Wednesday we'll be treating 3 patients, two of whom we would not have been able to treat without that. And the learning cycle, we're doing things differently and presumably better, and our outcomes show that today than we were doing a year ago. A case where it hasn't worked as well, I think, could be in left atrial appendage closure. This is a device which provides an alternative to oral anticoagulation in patients with atrial fibrillation who are at high risk for stroke. This is a huge problem. The chances are, among us, overwhelming that one of us will have AFib and require stroke reduction therapy. And in this room, there's probably 30 of us. And that the stroke risk in some of these patients is nearly 50%, and these are huge strokes. Anyone who's taken care of or had a loved one who had a stroke, huge emotional problem with a very large healthcare burden. These new devices have been in the clinic for 10 years. There's a fairly robust, there's an emerging set of data that, and I think there's consensus opinion that there's an important role for the first generation device that can play today. However, the FDA is in a terrible spot. Jeff, you're in a difficult position, you're your team in terms of deciding what to do here going forward, because despite this consensus opinion, there's some real issues in terms of the data provided to us. And there's been 3 panel meetings, and the inability to get this into the clinic has absolutely stopped next generation investment. The other players are waiting to get clarity how to get to the clinic, and that it's had a very chilling effect. There's no doubt that the vocabulary that could be provided to FDA, provided by things outlined in this report, would allow the flexibility to really move forward in this, to be able to learn to address an immediate unmet need, but also to provide the innovators with the ability to respond to what is seen in a real effective manner going forward. So I see some real, very important relevance to what's going on here in terms of really driving the innovative cycle and working. What we're all trying to do is to provide better outcomes for our patients in an effective, efficient manner.
Thank you, Aaron. I'll turn to Ross next.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark. Pleasure to be here, and I really want to congratulate the group. I know how being involved in the Medical Device Innovation Consortium and our work on patient-centered benefit risk, I know how hard it is to sculpt the fog in some of these areas. Great, simple idea, but getting to details can be challenging, and I think you guys have done a great job. I want to, as Aaron mentioned, I want to come at this from the point of view of someone who is involved in early stage innovation. And we live in an incredibly paradoxical time with that regard. Everybody wants innovation. I don't think there's anybody who's anti-innovation if we can develop technologies that will improve medical care. And we live in a time where science advances and advances in materials technology and information technology allow us to do some amazing things. At the same time, as Aaron mentioned, we're in the worst environment for funding medical device innovation since 1995 or before. And the reason is, to some points Omar made earlier, you have to, in order to build these technologies, you have to build a sustainable business around them. You have to be able to attract capital to them that will allow you to build those businesses. The time frames to develop technology and get them through regulatory approval, through reimbursement into the market, and to be successful businesses has stretched so long that we can't attract capital to them in the way that we could even 5 years ago. So why have those time frames stretched? Well, part of it's been regulation and some changing time frames and reimbursement that occurred over the last decade. I think Jeff and his team at FDA deserve a lot of credit for recognizing that and really taking concrete actions on the regulatory front to improve that process. Over the last several years, we've seen an approval in the predictability and time frames to approval. So that's getting better. But the time frame that's really getting worse now is on the reimbursement side. The challenge of an innovative technology, which often needs a new code, as well as coverage by public and private payers, the time frame to getting that is stretching longer and longer and longer, and often takes us anywhere from 2 to 5 years after FDA approval to get reimbursement in place, allowing companies to actually build a sustainable business. So what used to be a 5 to 7 year process a decade ago to build a company through to liquidity so we could, as investors, could return our capital to our investors, is now an 8 to 10 to 12 to 15 year process. And because of that, we've seen over 70% decline in the funding of medical device startups since 2008. And we're literally at the levels that we haven't seen since 1995. And so we all want innovation, but unless we can improve the return on investment for investors, we won't attract the capital to fund that innovation. The post-market surveillance system could be a great boon for this process, or it could create additional problems for us. And it really depends on how it is used by particularly the payment community for looking at these technologies. If it is used in a way that says, wow, we have this new safety net, so we can know that if we have a problem with safety or lack of efficacy, we'll detect it early, we can stop paying down the road, but that will allow us to pay earlier, that would be great. If it improves coverage with evidence development programs and abilities to partner with industry to sort of cover things early and get it into the market in a covered way, that would be wonderful. But if it's used and it's an excuse to wait and see, that we have we can wait and see how long it takes, until we have this evidence from the system, then it's going to be a negative. And I think really the discussion needs to be about how we can partner with the payment community, both CMS and the private payers, to use the system to improve the ability to get innovative technologies into the market in a timely way. What we need, we've seen CMS come out with recent guidance about coverage, what it calls coverage with evidence development, which I would call coverage for evidence development, in the sense the guidance really suggests they're going to pay for clinical trials. They're not going to pay for the use of the technology on the label in a broader population. We've also seen, Mike, that your group has gotten experience where CMS has actually paid in a form of coverage with evidence development. They pay on label while you're doing ongoing studies, and that's a system that could work. So we have an interesting time here where beyond the post-market surveillance aspects of this, we really need to think of how that plays into the reimbursement aspects of it. I'll stop with that.
Great. Thanks, Ross. I'll go on to Mike.
Thanks, Mark. It's my pleasure to be here. I work in a company and in an industry where our employees are turned on by the idea that they could do something to impact patients' lives. This is really what gets them going. And people consider it a privilege. And this subject gets to be so important because there's so much at stake. Now, I have tremendous respect for Aaron and Ross and the rest of the participants. I'll take a little bit of exception to something that you said, Ross. You said everybody agrees that innovation is important. Although I think maybe everybody says that, I'm not sure everybody behaves that way in our system. And right now, you've got a system, when it's designed in such a way that you believe that, boy, if we can just move everybody to best care, or if we can just move everybody to the most cost-effective care, or if we can just eliminate those mistakes, then we'll have a better system. And that's all true. Who can argue with that? And we have a surveillance system, for example, in medical devices that mostly is around finding safety signals, finding things that are wrong. But if you believe that we can make healthcare better, that we can innovate and make it better and better and better, then you say, wait, we need a system that does more than just making it safer. We need to find a system that allows us to learn and get better. That makes the system more complex. If it was easy, we would have already done it. But now we're asking the level of complexity to come up. And then when you add the complexity of medical technology innovation and the fact that it's iterative, it makes it even more complicated, right? Because, hey, if you're studying a biologic or a pharmaceutical, you finally decide on what that molecule looks like, you design a great study, and you see how it comes out. In medical technology, often we'll do our best work, we'll design a study, but once the study begins, then we start really learning. We learn something about what kind of training is most effective. How do you best do your imaging? What patients really respond and don't respond? How can we make these devices better? How can we lower complications? The list goes on and on. And what you want is a system that allows us to learn and iterate and get better and better. So it almost sounds like an impossible way to get at this, but I think, through this report, there's been really some thoughtful efforts. It was mentioned that we were part of this TVT registry, which is a study of transcatheter valve patients, and basically it's studied every single patient in the United States that's gotten a transcatheter valve. Now that was very difficult and challenging to get into. It took incredible cooperation with the FDA and CMS, physicians like Dr. Michael Mack and others, to help weave this together in some kind of comprehensive registry, and we end up having a lot of very bright data that comes in from that, and we're able to learn and improve, and we've already seen the benefits of that, because these patients that are getting transcatheter heart valves are getting much better therapy today than they got 5 years ago when the technology was introduced. And this is a result of the learning that's taken place. Now, having said that, it's not necessarily scalable and practical for all medical technology. We've had the benefit of, we're sort of a company, and there's some others in this space that have this long-run point of view that can take this high investment road. There's some issues with the transcatheter technology as well. So we've got hundreds of data fields that have to be filled out manually. Well, that's not ideal. When you hear about this vision of the future of, gee, can't we get it populated from electronic health records? Now you're talking about something that can be cost-effective, large-scale learning, get all this evidence that can inform us and allow us to innovate and move this in a much better fashion. So we've got the opportunity to do better. We've got I think, a good case study for some learning and extending it to larger populations, but still much to be done in that regard. One of the things that I feel broadly about that's similar to the comments that were made is we need to try and just take the barriers out of the innovation process. Part of it is the development of this evidence needs to be more economic than it has been in the past. And this is where there maybe is a key role for registries and other bright ideas like that. Also, the economic incentives need to be more set up to encourage the innovation. And I think there's creative possibilities for doing that. There are some bright ideas. The use of coverage with evidence development can provide some vehicles for that, but it's going to have to be carefully thought out with a lot of collaboration and thought about what's important from the patient's perspective. And then finally, the bright policies that are being envisioned by FDA when they say, hey, I want to go further than just looking at safety, but also how do we bring technologies to patients that are important to them. This is key in turning that into practice. There's actually a great example. When I listen to patients in the US, often what I hear is, okay, why do those innovations go overseas? Why don't they come here? Why do I have to go there to get those innovations? Because if I'm making the trade-off in a cost-benefit way, I'd like to be able to be involved and get access to that newer technology. So for example, there's some bright work done on a new frontier. There's a group of patients with mitral valve disease that have just horrible qualities of life, that get readmitted to hospitals on a regular basis and so forth, and some new therapy that might be able to help them. And through the efforts of the FDA, they've found a way to be able to encourage manufacturers to have a multi-center study right here in the US where we'll do some feasibility work. That's the kind of enlightened policy that I think helps take a positive step forward in this world of welcoming innovation and bringing it to the American patients that care most. So I think the acid test of all of our work is going to be when you actually have this conversation with a patient or a patient's family and you explain this system that we're creating for surveillance, for medical technology in the future. Does it resonate with them? Do you say, yeah, that feels about right for me as a patient? Thank you.
Mike, thank you. Thank all of you for your comments. You've teed up a lot of the significant challenges in device innovation now, and also some potential opportunities and cautions as this medical device surveillance effort moves forward. I do want to push a bit on picking up on the last panel's emphasis on specific next steps, what are the first priorities for addressing some of the concerns about innovations within the goals and context of the medical device surveillance system? Maybe things that could be incorporated in early pilots. You all particularly highlighted the importance of not just thinking about the regulatory issues that FDA needs to address around better evidence on safety and effectiveness more quickly as products continue, as medical devices continue to evolve, but also issues related to coverage and the kind of evidence that that payers may want. And I wonder if you could help put a little bit more specificity on where these efforts might start to address both of those kinds of concerns. And just to pick up on some things I heard in the previous panel and here, one of the pilot areas highlighted would be that I think Lou mentioned was faster, more reliable way of identifying safety problems and then notifying patients via connection to UDI tracking or something like that. Does that sound like it makes sense? Second area, picking up on comments from Mike and others, is a more automatically populated version of a TVT registry, one that doesn't take so much time and efforts to fill out lots of fields manually, but would still quickly and reliably capture key information to help with that. I know a lot of people call it a cycle, Ross, the cycle of product development, but it really is a continuous improvement process for devices, right? You start out in one place, and unlike a drug molecule, these products do continuously change. And the question is, how do you make the most important changes as quickly and as low cost as possible to get to better outcomes and fewer complications? So collecting these kinds of data more reliably, or data that could feed into that more reliably, is clearly something that could be beneficial, but right now seems pretty costly. So maybe I could just ask you all about further thoughts. And let's push this a little bit on, given the challenge that you've raised, how can this system, as it undertakes its early efforts, show that kind of payoff, not just for safety and effectiveness for patients, but for improving the innovation process for medical devices?
One thing, somebody had mentioned earlier, the perfect enemy of the good, and I think the important thing is to take some first steps. In a prior life, I used to do outcomes research based on claims data, which is the best we had at the time. And the question I wonder is whether there's a way to use existing claims data to identify potential problem areas that can be then drilled down, and also do that in context of working with people, groups like the certain integrated healthcare delivery systems that already have pretty good information systems, to start exploring some of these areas. And I don't know, not heavily involved in that anymore, but I would try to look at people who have existing infrastructure to at least start pilot projects on a small scale around certain technologies where there's an evidence, either a safety concern or an efficacy concern, that you can identify potentially from claims data.
Some of those groups are particularly concerned about value and are shifting their payment mechanisms we heard earlier. Aaron or Mike?
You want to go? Otherwise,
Yeah, I think that the problem a lot is that these issues are very device and indication specific. And I think the strength of the TVT was that it brought things together in a very circumspect manner. It was a very relatively easy population to define, a first-in-class device that lent itself to it. And that's not always the case. But there are other examples. I alluded to one where that, as part of the, this kind of rebalancing the, where you put your your approval, that really recognizes that the ability to prospectively get an understanding of how first-in-class devices in particular are being used and be able to work under CED will allow us to get the data actually that we really want. Because I think that one thing I'd like to emphasize is that the data coming from randomized trials are really from a bubble. There's a real, from my experience with the stent company, that the people in the randomized trial is actually a slightly different population. and that the sooner we can get an objective data on what's going on in the post-market, that's really what we want. So very specifically, to put that, we now have the ability to really have a far more effective early post-market surveillance to really be able to give FDA the understanding of, or the kind of comfort about safety and efficacy, and then also obviously working with the payers. And I think the payers, you know, they always say, well, look, we're looking for data, and, you know, look at acute infarct angioplasty. Reduced mortality in the 50s was 30%, you know, for someone coming in with an anterior infarct. Now it's 3%. That was a very iterative process. A lot of things that went into there, a real ecosystem. And that if I went to FDA today, I said, I have this idea for a stent. I convinced someone at Medtronic to go in with a balloon and says, we're going to do this. Like, oh, show us that you're making, the payers, show us that we're making people's lives better. Or we'll do this big randomized trial to show that it saves lives in acute infarct angioplasty. That happened 20 years later. And the amount of investment to get there. So I think that there needs to be a recognition on the payers that there needs to be investment there too, because, you know, they, you know, if they just sit back and say, oh, look, we're looking for the data, I think the problem is that we won't get the return on some of our other investments, and it really gets in this technology forward.
And more clarity about how these systems could help answer those payer questions.
And
would,
they really
at
can.
a lower cost, would really help move this forward.
Yep.
Mike?
Yeah, you know, anybody in this debate is going to say, gee, we need the evidence. The problem is, so how do we get that, and who's going to pay for collecting all that evidence? If there's an ability to look back at old data, terrific. We can find ways to mine data, but if it's an innovation and we're looking for evidence that hasn't been created, we need to find ways that you would find companies that would actually be willing to invest in collecting the evidence. And to do that, there probably needs to be a few principles. One is not make it so costly. You know, early on in a development, you'd say, boy, there might be 300 different variables that could affect the outcomes of these patients. I better collect them all. But as we get smarter, can we take it to 30 variables or even 3 variables? So that part of it is part of the equation. The other part of the equation is sort of the governance of this. And I think Lou brought this up in our world of cable news and Twitter and so forth. If you're collecting real world evidence, how much do you react to a single incident that happens when there's hundreds or thousands going on every day? These are the kind of things that would scare innovators to some extent, that there would be overreaction. Can you put a governance system over a registry such you'd say, no, I'll have thoughtful clinicians without vested interests that look at the data in its totality, say what is truly a signal, what is possibly an aberration, and to do that reporting in a thoughtful, clinically scientific and relevant basis. Those are the kind of things that would encourage people to take the risk, make the investments to fund evidence collection.
Thank you. Thank you all for that response. So I asked a long question that required thoughtful answers, and as a result, we are at the end of the time for this session. So we are going to break now. I'd first like to thank the panel, and then I have a little bit of logistical information for all of you. But first, thank you all for bringing up these very important extensions of the core issues that we've been discussing today around medical device surveillance. Medical device innovation is a critical topic, and appreciate its tight interaction with the surveillance activities that will hopefully be following from this meeting. Thank you all very much.